It's 1596, and Europe's mightiest empires are clawing for glory, chasing a mythical frozen shortcut to Asia's endless treasures, the Northeast Passage. Leading the Dutch charge is Willem Barentsz, a daring genius convinced the Arctic sun will carve him a path to immortality. But up there, in that endless white hell, something's watching, waiting, hungry. The true kings of the ice, the massive, merciless polar bears, patrol their domain, ready to tear apart anything foolish enough to trespass. And Barentsz, he's about to become their next obsession. Leading his third and final expedition, Barentsz commanded 2 ships. The stakes were higher than ever. The Dutch government was no longer funding these risky ventures. Instead, they offered a massive prize for success. Spurred on by this, Barentsz sailed from Amsterdam in May, convinced he could conquer the ice. His first major discovery was an island, aptly named Bear Island, after a brutal, terrifying encounter. A polar bear, monstrously strong, attempted to climb aboard their ship. The men fought it with pikes and muskets, and were stunned by its raw power, its refusal to die. It was a harrowing omen of the world they were entering. Soon after, a dispute split the expedition. One captain turned back. Barentsz, resolute and stubborn, pushed his ship east, along the coast of the Siberian islands of Novaya Zemlya, deeper into the unforgiving white. It was a fatal miscalculation. By late August, the Arctic began to reclaim its territory. The summer sun, which Barentsz had placed so much faith in, weakened. The sea began to congeal, turning from water to slush, then to solid plates of ice. His ship, once a vessel of discovery, became a prisoner. The crew listened in horror as the sounds of the sea were replaced by the shriek and groan of their own vessel being slowly, relentlessly crushed. The ice packed in around them, lifting the hull, twisting the timbers until they splintered. They were trapped, stranded at the edge of the known world as the endless winter night began to descend. Their ship, their only way home, was dying. With their vessel rendered an unlivable, frozen tomb, the 16 men made an unprecedented choice. They would abandon ship and build a house on the barren shore. It was an act of pure desperation. They called it Het Behouden Huis, the saved house. Their building materials were a strange miracle. Massive driftwood logs, Siberian trees carried for thousands of miles on ocean currents, now frozen into the coastline. Dragging these immense timbers through the deepening snow was torturous work for men already weakened by cold and dwindling rations. They cannibalized their own ship, prying up deck planks for walls and beams for rafters. They layered the roof with sailcloth and packed it with snow, sealing themselves into a crude, cramped log cabin. At its center, they built a hearth with an improvised chimney. This tiny flicker of fire in a 7-by-5-meter hut was now their entire world, their only defense against a cold so profound it could freeze a man solid in minutes. As they sealed the final gaps against the wind, they knew their true ordeal was just beginning. The sun was about to vanish for months, and they could hear the bears circling in the growing dark. The sun was gone. Not setting, but gone entirely. On the 4th of November, it dipped below the horizon and didn't come back. The 16 men inside Het Behouden Huis were now plunged into a darkness that would last for months. Their world shrank to the flickering orange glow of a single fire, fueled by the salvaged wood of their broken ship. Outside, the temperature plummeted to unimaginable lows. The cold was a physical presence, a predator that seeped through every crack in their makeshift cabin. It froze their clothes solid, turning them into suits of icy armor. Their beards and hair became tangled messes of frost. The smoke from their fire coated every surface with a greasy black soot, mixing with the ice that formed on the inside walls inches from the flames. The men would huddle together, listening to the cabin timbers groaning under the weight of the snow and the relentless, howling wind. But the wind wasn't the only thing they heard. The bears were always there. Drawn by the scent of men and their dwindling food, the great white beasts became their jailers. They would circle the cabin for hours, their massive forms just shadows in the pale moonlight. The men learned the sound of their heavy footsteps crunching in the snow. One night, a bear tried to tear its way in through their chimney, a makeshift barrel. They heard the scrape of claws on metal, the furious snarls echoing down into their tiny shelter. They stoked the fire, sending a plume of hot smoke and embers shooting up, driving the beast back, but only for a moment. Another time, a bear threw its full weight against their door, the wood splintering under the assault. The men inside grabbed muskets and pikes, their hearts hammering, knowing that this flimsy wall of driftwood was the only thing between them and being torn to shreds. They were living in a cage, and the hunters were just outside. The enemy outside was terrifying, but a slower, more insidious killer was already inside with them. Scurvy. With no fresh food, the disease began its work. It started with an agonizing pain in their joints, a deep lethargy that made every movement an ordeal. Then their gums began to swell and blacken, their teeth loosening in their sockets until they could be pulled out with their fingers. Old wounds, long healed, reopened and began to bleed. The men were rotting from the inside out. Their bodies were failing them, and so were their minds. Tempers flared in the cramped, smoky darkness. Arguments broke out over the last drops of rationed wine, the only thing that brought a fleeting moment of warmth. Barentsz, though weakened himself, tried to maintain discipline. He organized routines, insisted on exercise, anything to fight off the suffocating despair. They celebrated the 12th night feast with 2 pounds of flour baked into pancakes and a sip of wine for each man, a desperate attempt to pretend they were still civilized, still human. But the winter ground on. Barentsz himself grew gravely ill, confined to his bunk, his body racked with the agony of scurvy. The men watched their leader, the man who had promised them a path to glory, fade before their eyes. The firewood was running low. The bears were becoming more daring. Death felt not just possible, but inevitable, a cold certainty in the endless night. They marked the days on a calendar, clinging to the hope that time was still passing in the world beyond their frozen prison. And then, on the 24th of January, one of the men, Gerrit de Veer, saw it. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, a hallucination born of darkness and starvation. But it was real, a sliver of brilliant red, a tiny arc of fire on the southern horizon, the sun. It had returned. It was weak, its light too feeble to offer any real warmth, but it was there. For the first time in 3 months they saw the light of day. The sight sent a shockwave of raw, desperate hope through the cabin. The polar night was over, but their ordeal was not. They were still hundreds of miles from civilization, their ship was a wreck, and their bodies were broken. The sun brought light, but it also revealed the true scale of the impossible journey that lay ahead of them. Surviving the winter was one thing. Escaping the Arctic would be another. The sun returned, but it was a cold, distant god. Its light offered no warmth, only a harsh illumination of their reality. The great ship, their only bridge to the world, lay shattered and frozen, a wooden skeleton half buried in the snow. Escape wouldn't come from repairs. It would have to be built, with frozen hands and scurvy-rotted bodies. Their only hope lay in the 2 small open boats salvaged from the wreck. For months, as the ice slowly, grudgingly began to crack, the men worked. They were specters, their skin a sickly gray, their teeth loose in their jaws. They stripped planks from their cabin, the very shelter that had saved them, using the wood to raise the sides of the small boats, preparing them for a 1,000-mile journey through the most treacherous seas on Earth. Willem Barentsz, their commander, was too weak to stand. He directed the work from his bunk, his voice a rasp, his mind still charting a course through the impossible. By mid-June, a narrow channel of open water appeared. It was time. They loaded their pathetic supplies, a few barrels of salted meat, some ship's biscuit, and carried Barentsz to one of the boats. On June 13, 1597, after 257 days trapped in the ice, they pushed off, leaving their frozen prison behind. The journey was a new kind of hell. They rowed and sailed through a maze of shifting ice floes, massive plates of ice that could crush their flimsy boats in an instant. Polar bears, relentless and starving after the long winter, stalked them along the ice edge, sometimes even swimming out to attack them in the open water. The men fought them off with muskets and pikes, their terror mixed with a desperate hunger. One bear killed was a feast. Just a week into their voyage, the end came for their leader. Barentsz lay dying, wrapped in blankets. He asked Gerrit de Veer to pass him the chart they had made of the coastline. He studied it, his eyes tracing the lines of the land he had discovered. The land that would be his grave. And then he was gone. His body, along with that of another crewman who died the same day, was committed to the freezing, unforgiving sea. Now they were truly alone, leaderless, adrift at the top of the world. For 6 more weeks they battled south. They were attacked by a herd of walruses, their massive tusks threatening to tear their boats apart. They landed on desolate shores to hunt for birds' eggs, their only fresh food. Yet they kept going, driven by a primal instinct to live. And then, at the end of July, they saw it. A smudge of smoke on the horizon. It led them to a small Russian hunting outpost. The men there gave them food and shelter, a moment of miraculous respite. Rejuvenated, they pushed on, eventually reaching the Kola Peninsula. It was there, on the 30th of August, that they spotted a familiar sight, a Dutch ship. As they drew closer, a figure on deck shouted down to them. It was Jan Cornelissen Rijp, the captain of the other ship from their expedition, the one that had turned back the year before, believing them lost. He thought he was seeing ghosts. Of the 17 men who had set out from Amsterdam full of hope for a northeast passage, only 12 returned. They were broken, emaciated, but alive. They had failed to find a route to China, but they had achieved something far more incredible. They had become the first Europeans to survive an Arctic winter. Their story, meticulously recorded in Gerrit de Veer's diary, became a legend, a testament not to the glory of discovery, but to the raw, unyielding power of human endurance when pitted against the absolute indifference of the natural world. If you enjoyed this true survival story, subscribe and stay tuned for our next video.